All right, thanks, Abby, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you again for joining us for the second meeting of the Denver Natural Medicine Work Group. I just wanted to, first thank everybody for the great conversation that we had last time. It was really helpful and informative. We all were very engaged, so we really appreciate your participation. I know I took a lot away from the conversation and learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot today and in our future conversations as well. Really, as I stated before, the purpose of this is for us to learn from all of you who have experience and knowledge in this area. And so we appreciate all the information that you've been willing to share so far, and appreciate really just the patience and grace you've had with us with some of the questions and the conversations that we've been able to have with you. I know came away from the last meeting with lots of questions and wanted to jump into the conversation lots of times, but I'm really just trying to sit back and learn and listen and soak it all in. So thank you all for being participatory in that conversation so that we can take some really rich information away from it. So we've got, last meeting was definitely setting the foundation and learning what we want to talk about. And now we have some really good discussion questions that Abby and Erica will guide us through today. So I think we're excited to jump in. As far as the agenda, I'll start with a land acknowledgement, which I'll read here in just a second. But then we're going to do just a couple of reminders and refreshers from last time, which is around the purpose, the role, and guiding principles. We'll also do a refresher on the kind of difference in where the state has some regulatory roles versus our local regulatory roles. We have ENC here today, who will do an overview of the draft facilitator rules, and federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group. He'll do an overview of that as well. We'll also kind of recap what we took away from the first meeting and some of the themes that we heard from everybody, and how we've turned that into a roadmap for the agendas that we want to develop today and in the next couple of meetings. And then, as I said, Abby and Erica will guide us through a couple of different discussion questions, and then we'll leave some time for public comment at the end. We'll start that around 3:45. Okay, so I'll read the land acknowledgement and then I will pass it back to Abby and Erica. The Department of Excise and Licenses would like to honor and acknowledge that the land on which we live and work is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, as well as being historically tied to at least 48 contemporary tribal nations. We honor those who have stewarded this land throughout generations and recognize that government, academic, and cultural institutions were built on and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. As individuals and as a department, we are committed to working to dismantling ongoing systems and legacies of oppression and inequity, and we value the historical, current, and future contributions of Indigenous communities in Denver. All right, I will pass it over to, Erica.
Help if I unmuted. There we go. All right, hi everybody. So nice to see you all again. So just like in our first meeting, we'll start with this overview of the purpose and role of the work group before we dive into the discussion. The purpose of the Natural Medicine Work Group is to provide suggestions and feedback on whether and how the city and county of Denver should license and or regulate natural medicine businesses. One caveat that I mentioned last time that I'll repeat over and over is that using the term businesses, we understand implies a commercial aspect, and we know that that is an explicit piece of the state legislation to avoid commercialization. So please know that when we say businesses, we mean, establishments, operations. It's a colloquial term that we use a lot, and so we don't mean to deviate from that meaning and that purpose in the statute if we use that word. So what does this really mean? I think, to looking at whether and how we license and or regulate these establishments, it means that we know Colorado voters ask for broader access to natural medicine and that the state will begin issuing licenses next year. We do acknowledge that there are critical narratives around that series of events and that there is a history of government action that has caused serious harm in the communities that have traditionally practiced natural medicine. We know that it's impossible to separate our discussions here today from this history and this harm, so we won't ask you to do that, but we do hope that this group can be a space for aspirational narratives about how the city can support our communities in this new legal landscape as we move forward and face the regulatory questions that are in front of all of us. So that said, some of the reminders, the natural medicine work group will not re-legislate state law. We don't have that authority to change anything in state law. We do try to be in touch with the state as they're developing rules, but we can't change that here. Next, the natural medicine work group is advisory in nature, and it will not vote on issues or reach consensus around recommendations. And when we say that we won't vote or be looking to achieve consensus, it's just because we want to honor those critical narratives that will always be baked into this work. However, if there is consensus on a topic or a particular approach or recommendation, we will definitely note that, but we don't want our work group members to feel pressure to concede any of their important stances. So that takes me to our third point, which is that each member is an equal participant and has an equal opportunity to voice their opinions and contribute ideas. The city will consider all input gathered through this group and from public comments in developing our recommendations for the mayor and for city council consideration if necessary. So any proposal to license or regulate natural medicine businesses and establishments would have to go through that public process, would have to be approved by city council and the mayor, and would entail additional opportunities for public feedback. So we know that's a fast-moving timeline that we're working on, and we know that government entities rarely get anything right on the first try, if ever. So we are committed to continuous outreach and public input as we move through this process. And we're also committed to continuous improvement. So if changes are needed in the future as implementation unfolds, we will still be here to listen and improve. I'll use that point as an opportunity to thank those of you and the folks who have met with us for coffee, for dialogue, for additional information. We can only do this work as a community, and we are so grateful for the incredible depth of experience and passion that each of you bring to this discussion. So now that we've gone over the purpose and role of the group, I'll also repeat some guiding principles that we like to abide by in our excise and license work groups. These principles are built not just on what we expect from our volunteer work group members, but also the standards that we hold ourselves to as the agency facilitating the work group. So again, this isn't just how we're asking you to treat each other, but how we agree to show up for you all as well. And so those guiding principles are that work group members value the expertise and unique perspectives of all other work group members. Work group members recognize the legitimacy of the interests, concerns, and goals of the others, whether or not they agree. And work group members treat each other and all meeting attendees with respect, civility, and courtesy. From that, I'll kick it over to Abby.
Thanks, Erica, and thank you all for your patience as we go through a few of these slides that you may have seen before, but we just want to reiterate some of these important points and frame the conversation going forward. So as a reminder, the state law requires that local governments are not allowed to prohibit the establishment or operation of natural medicine licenses. So there will be natural medicine facilities in Denver regardless. And so the task at hand for us is figuring out how and whether to license them at the local level as well, in addition to the state license and state regulations that will be in place. Local governments may not prohibit the transportation of natural medicine on public roads by licensed persons, and local governments may not adopt ordinances or regulations that are unreasonable or in conflict with state law. Local governments may enact ordinances and regulations governing the time, place, and manner of operation of natural medicine licenses. So that's what this group is working to discuss. And then as a reminder, there are two primary departments and divisions at the state level that are overseeing different aspects of the Natural Medicine Health Act implementation. So In the Colorado Department of Revenue is the Division of Natural Medicine. And that division will license and regulate cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, testing laboratories, and healing centers, as well as any other licenses that they may determine are necessary through rulemaking. They will also issue licenses to individual owners and individual employees. In the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, the Division of Professions and Occupations will be licensing facilitators. And then that division also oversees the Natural Medicine Advisory Board. Sorry, as a reminder, our local process here is separate from those state processes and separate from those state rulemaking processes. Like Erica said, we are in communication with our partners at the state, and we're sharing information and sharing feedback. But the regulations that we put into place at the local level are a different and separate independent process from any rulemaking that's taking place by the Division of Natural Medicine or by the Division of Professions and Occupations. So next I will hand it over to Ian C.
What's going on? How are you doing?
Who is going, who is going to give us a presentation about the DORA draft rules for facilitators and the federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group. Ian, do you need to share your screen? If so, I can stop sharing.
I don't need to. I am going to add a couple links, which I can add through the chat or I can send to you. But that's the extent of what I plan to share visually.
Okay, great. I will stop sharing just to give you the floor.
Thank you. I assume everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Let me just put these in the chat real quick to everybody. I think that it will go to everyone. Thanks, Abby. So my name is Ian Sieve. I'm the Governor's Special Advisor on Cannabis and Natural Medicine for the state of Colorado. As Abby just alluded to, DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and DOR, the Department of Revenue, have started the rulemaking process to implement Senate Bill 23290, which is called Natural Medicine Regulation and Legalization, that the Governor Polis signed into law in May of 2023. Our rulemaking meetings are open to the public, and they are designed to develop rules or regulations for regulated natural medicine use in Colorado. Please keep in mind that while DORA and DOR are coordinating closely in their implementation of the Senate bill, the rulemaking work that they're administering is a separate process from each other, as well as any local jurisdiction processes. So we do encourage all interested parties to visit each of their websites, the links that I provided, to learn more about the subjects that they're covering in their rulemaking and how you can participate in each process. So for DORA, the Division of Professions, and DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and more specifically, the Division of Professions and Occupations is the specific division at DORA. They're going to begin taking applications for natural medicine facilitators no later than December 31st, 2024, this year. And so we've established that rulemaking process, and that's been established as followed. So we've, I'll tell you a little bit about past and future meetings, as well as a little bit about this other working group. So our facilitator licensing and education requirements, there was a stakeholder meeting on March 8th. And that purpose of that stakeholder meeting was for our director of the divisions of professions and occupations and the program director of the Natural Medicine Advisory Board to receive feedback regarding our proposed rules, our rules 2 through rules 4.3, which were about facilitator licensing rules that were regarding education requirements to implement Senate Bill 23290. So specifically, again, the facilitator licensing and rules regarding education requirements. So we're going to be having a permanent rulemaking hearing specifically for that piece of our DORA rules, the facilitator licensing and education requirements, on May 3rd. And that's going to allow stakeholders a final opportunity to testify before our director of the Division of Professions and Occupations, deciding whether or not they'll adopt those proposed rules for facilitator licensing and education requirements to implement our Senate bill. Tomorrow, we are going to have a DORA, Department of Regulatory Agencies meeting regarding standards of practice. So the purpose of this stakeholder meeting tomorrow will be for the director of DPO and the program director of the Colorado Natural Medicine Advisory Board to receive feedback in regards to our proposed new rule. It's Rule 6 called Standards of Practice, and Rule 7, Advertising, about Colorado Senate Bill 23290. These, I want to point you to the links that I just provided at the beginning. These are going to be available on the DORA website, dpo.colorado.gov/natural medicine. There will be a permanent rulemaking hearing for standards of practice that will take place on June 20th. So we'll take the written and public comment that we get at the meeting tomorrow and anything in between, and that will be used to amend and change possibly the draft rules that will be presented tomorrow. And so there will be a final opportunity again to testify for standards of practice, which is again the standards of practice in advertising, on June 20th at 1 p.m. We're also going to have a meeting, our initial meeting for discipline violations and really any other rules will be taking place on May 14th at 2 p.m. The purpose of that meeting will be for the director of DPO and the program director of the Colorado Natural Medicine Advisory Board to receive feedback regarding proposed rules, which will be Rule 8 about discipline and violation, and any other rules that we have not yet drafted to implement the Colorado Senate bill. So again, that will be on May 14th, and then we'll have our permanent rulemaking hearing for adopting proposed rules for discipline and violations and any other rules on July 8th. Additionally, we have a working group, and I'll give you a little bit of an overview. Established under the Senate bill last year, Senate Bill 23290, again called Natural Medicine Regulation and Legalization. We have the federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group. And that was has been established for the purpose of engaging and creating a dialogue to identify issues related to the commercialization of natural medicine product, and natural medicine services for tribal and indigenous people, communities, cultures, and religions. Our community working group is going to study items including, but not limited to, avoiding the misappropriation and exploitation of the federally recognized tribes and indigenous people, communities, cultures, and religions. 2, avoiding the excessive commercialization of natural medicine product, and natural medicine services. 3, any conservation issues associated with the legalization and regulation of natural medicine or natural medicine products, including the potential for further depletion of peyote due to peyote being a source of mescaline. And 4, best practices in open communication to build trust and understanding between the federally recognized tribes and indigenous people and communities, the board, the division, the state licensing authority, and law enforcement agencies for the purpose of avoiding unnecessary burdens and criminalization of traditional, tribal, and indigenous uses of natural medicine. This working group is housed under the Natural Medicine Program at the Division of Professions and Occupations at the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. The state 9 members have been selected and accepted, and I'll stress selected and accepted, not appointed, for these volunteer roles. And that same link that I provided earlier, I'll put it again right here. If you go to this link, you can see the 9 people that we have selected and accepted for these volunteer roles. The first meeting of the federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group is going to be on May 8th at 2 p.m. And additionally, I want to let you know that the Natural Medicine Advisory Board meets every month on the 3rd Friday of each month. They'll be reviewing and clarifying rule revisions, including policies and forms. So there's going to be 2 more of those, May 17th and June 21st, both at 1 p.m. The Natural Medicine Advisory Board combined subcommittee. We had several subcommittees while the Natural Medicine Advisory Board was forming their initial recommendations. Natural Medicine Advisory Board has since decided to have one combined subcommittee rather than a subcommittee for each of the different work groups that we're meeting. And so that advisory board combined subcommittee will meet every month on the 2nd Friday. And the purpose of the subcommittee is to review, discuss, and clarify. Additionally, they're looking at topics for future recommendations and medicines. They will meet on May 10th and June 14th. Finally, the federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group will meet the 2nd Wednesday of every month until their work is complete. With that, I will pass it back to our friends at the city. Thank you for allowing me to share some information with you all today.
Thank you so much, Ian. Appreciate you sharing all of that information. And I think Erica put links in the Q&A in case any members of the public are interested in those links. So I will resume our presentation. Just need to share my screen. Okay. So after our first meeting where everybody shared kind of what your top priorities and questions and concerns about natural medicine regulation in Denver are, we went back to the state statute as well as any draft rules that have been put out by the Department of Revenue or the Department of Regulatory Agencies and tried to identify where those topics might be being addressed in state law or in state rules. And so those themes included advertising, centering Native American and Indigenous voices, environmental sustainability, considerations around legacy healers and people who've been practicing in the traditional space, location, proximity, and zoning requirements for facilities, patient or participant accessibility to natural medicine healing centers and services, participant experience while they're having a natural medicine experience, product safety, preventing exploitation of Indigenous traditions, public education, record keeping, regulatory costs to businesses and facilitators, and security of facilities. So you can see that all of these topics are being addressed in one way or another in state rulemaking. And also, I just want to note that even if there's not an X in one of the rows for one of the columns, that doesn't mean that that agency won't be addressing it. It just means that it hasn't been explicitly required by the statute that they address it, or that it hasn't come up yet in draft rules that they've put out. So if there are any other themes from that first meeting that you heard that we missed, feel free to put them in the chat. And we can also discuss more as we dive into our discussion, but just wanted to sort of recap those things that we talked about and then set the stage for our next few meetings. So starting with our meeting today, today we'll be talking about Native American, Indigenous, and traditional communities and equitable implementation of the state law here in Denver. That will be the focus of one of our discussions during this meeting, but it'll also be a continuing theme throughout future meetings. So just because we talked about it today doesn't mean we're never talking about it again. It just means that that is a focus of this meeting. And then today we'll also talk about participant safety and participant accessibility. At our May 23rd meeting, we're planning to address location, proximity, and zoning requirements for natural medicine facilities. We'll talk about facility security, we'll talk about advertising, and then we'll talk specifically about requirements for healing centers. And then at our June 27th meeting, we're planning to dive into cultivation and manufacturing processes, fire, health, and other safety risks associated with those types of facilities, sustainability, and product safety. So these are, these are not the only topics we can talk about in these meetings, but these are sort of the areas of focus that we want to address at each meeting. And we've also timed them so that they line up with the state's rulemaking process. So our May 23rd meeting will come after some of those topics come up at the state rulemaking. And then our June 27th meeting will also come after some of those topics are discussed during state rulemaking. And then, as always, this is all subject to change, and we're willing to be nimble and flexible if this group identifies priorities that are pressing that we want to discuss, or if we need to shift agendas to accommodate more discussion about certain topics. And then additional meetings may be scheduled. So these are not the only 4 meetings potentially that we may have. We may schedule some additional meetings if we feel that there's more that needs to be discussed, or things that we just haven't gotten enough information about. So with that, I want to kick off our discussion today. We're going to start with our discussion about equitable implementation, excuse me. And I want to kind of set the stage for this discussion by just reminding everybody about the legislative intent that was stated explicitly in Senate Bill 23-290. So in that bill, the General Assembly declared that considerable harm may occur to the federally recognized American tribes and indigenous people, communities, cultures, and religions if natural medicine is overly commodified, commercialized, and exploited in a manner that results in the erasure of important cultural and religious context, and if facilitators, healing centers, and other natural medicine licensees with minimal or no connection to the traditional use of natural medicine misappropriate or exploit tribal and indigenous cultures and religions. Further, the General Assembly declared that although there may be tremendous potential in utilizing natural medicine for managing various mental health conditions, healing, and spiritual growth, this potential must be balanced with the health and safety risks that it could pose to consumers, as well as the cultural harms it could pose to the federally recognized American tribes and indigenous and traditional communities that have connections to natural medicine. So that was the legislative intent that was in the Natural Medicine Health Act that was passed by the General Assembly in 2023. So with all of that in mind, our question to you all is, how can the city implement the state law in a way that preserves the historical, cultural, and religious context behind natural medicine, reduces harms to the Native American tribes and indigenous and traditional communities that have connections to natural medicine, and prevents future harms to the Native American tribes and indigenous and traditional communities that have connections to natural medicine? Kind of a dense 3-part question, but feel free to jump in and raise your hand and contribute whatever thoughts or feelings or ideas you have about any of those parts of the question. Yeah, Noah, go ahead.
Hi. My comments on this question for preserving the historical, cultural, and religious context behind natural medicine. I know there are some rules being put into place about training for facilitators on this subject. And so I think it'd be important to kind of make sure that there are tribal leaders from federally recognized tribes that either approve or participate or add to the training material that's being provided to the facilitators. I also think that it's important that some of that information be available to the participants. Thank you.
Yeah, Val, please.
Hello, everyone. I'll just introduce myself very quickly because I'm being looped in. This is my first meeting. My name is Val Herrera. I am with Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Just 4 months into my new role as one of the new environmental justice administrators. This is very timely because I'm actually going to be establishing, implementing the first of its kind. And I'm so excited to share this. This is like really unique and extraordinary. The City and County of Denver's Climate Protection Fund through CASR is going to be funding an Indigenous Communities program. And so I don't have any questions. I am simply here as an observer, a listener, and so excited to see how we can support this and potentially collaborate. And I'm happy to come to this group with like a 10 to 15 minute environmental justice overview and give you a little bit more about CASR and everything that we're doing in that wheelhouse, because there is a lot being implemented throughout the whole city around equity, and my program in particular ties directly to this. So I just wanted to leave those thoughts in the room. I will put my email in the chat. And right now we're really focused on community engagement. So if anybody wants to connect with me, I would love to talk with you. I've already met with a ton of incredible folks, from elders to youth groups to community-based organizations, and just a bunch of different representatives from all over the city and county of Denver. So would love to meet with anyone that wants to talk with me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Val. That's really exciting. And I think we'd love to have more information about that fund at a future meeting. So thank you. Gabriella, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I don't really know where to begin because there's quite a bit here. But even just understanding Colorado's history and the Sand Creek Massacre and the history of the Wyo Boulder Valley and how much of that continues to be erased. And land acknowledgement's very performative. So even understanding that Colorado isn't there whatsoever in terms of acknowledging or doing the reparations. And even in school districts prohibit, school boards have prohibited the schools to teach the history of Sand Creek Massacre in the curriculum. So we already see that even in other areas regarding history and culture, it's not honored and it's not respected and it's not even talked about because it's inconvenient for Colorado to acknowledge that. So just starting with that. And then my concern around harm, reducing harm. So much of my colleagues that work in environmental justice and climate justice, how the state kind of uses these definitions of harm. Well, what is harm? And I certainly wouldn't want the government or this working board to decide that harm. I'd rather defer this to the American Tribes and the Indigenous Working Group to decide what that is. I also don't want this board to decide kind of what is acceptable, a level of harm to these communities. So I really don't want the government kind of deciding these definitions, what's acceptable, and then finding kind of loopholes to justify that harm. Which also ties into future harms. I just want to point out that I'm part of the work that I've been doing with some of my colleagues that are really concerned was to create this federal and recognize, it's a long name, but this Indigenous working group that is just kind of getting started. It didn't come from any of the citizen initiatives. It didn't come from anybody. It came from our work and our adamant persistence that we be represented here and not erased. So yeah, it's just inherently inequitable that it's almost 2 years. We're almost at the end of the 2-year implementation period and rulemaking period. And this board is just getting started. So I just want to see that deferring to that working group again and again and over, rather than us here in this working group making those decisions, especially because there's only 2 or 3 of us that are coming in with an equity perspective and coming in with Native American and Indigenous perspectives.
Thank you so much, Gabriella, for that perspective. And we'll go to Carissa next.
Hi, everyone. Just a quick recap. My name is Carissa Garcia. I'm an Indigenous Iraq War veteran. I'm also an anti-oppression and DEI educator, an Indigenous and environmental justice advocate. My priorities for the group are equity, mostly, and environmental protections. I absolutely agree with Gabby on the local and state governments not defining what is harm to Indigenous communities. I think this is very important. And I think that it is for the Indigenous people and the people impacted to make those definitions. And I think that as far as education, I think it was like Noah who started the conversation, was talking about education. And I just wanted to say that I think that basic diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice work should be included into the basic education. I think, especially for facilitators, in that even if you are trained by an Indigenous medicine person who has had generations of experience in facilitation, that does not make you a shaman, right? Taking a class from an Indigenous medicine person does not make any non-Indigenous person a shaman. Those kinds of things, there is very harmful language that that I have been witness to in the communities of natural medicine by primarily white facilitators who end up doing more harm culturally. My next point is around financial equity. I don't really see where this falls in, Abby, on the 3 points here, but I do see it as far as accessibility in the diagram. And financial equity is very important to me when we're discussing licensing. I think that prioritizing Indigenous people and Indigenous people and businesses for licensing is one way that we can do this. We have to understand that it is one thing to acknowledge cultural impacts, but if we don't make things accessible, those acknowledgements don't matter. I've talked to several people who have the thousands of dollars, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've even talked to people who have millions of dollars. They are frothing at the mouth to start businesses in our communities. And I don't know Indigenous people that have that kind of money. The people that we should prioritize have not necessarily laid the paths of accessibility for licensing. And I think that's very important conversation that we should have when we're talking about equitable implementation. Regarding future harm, I would like to discuss how industry and the commercialization or the non-commercialization, whatever language that we're trying to put to this, the industry overall, the impact of that on Black and Brown communities in the Denver metro area. Industry already disproportionately impacts these communities. Mostly because the facilities are cheaper, the land is cheaper, and because the government doesn't tend to care about the health, the physical health and wellness of the people living in those areas. So how can we prevent future harm and and create an equitable future with this natural medicine implementation by protecting communities that rich business owners are going to flock to, and who their businesses probably more than likely are not going to benefit the people of those communities, and rather will hike up their rents and create a even more disproportionate impact to them. Those are just my initial thoughts there as we move into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. Nico?
Hello. This might be under the jurisdiction of the state regulations, but it seems like regulations around natural medicine will come with guidelines and restrictions around how it's used. I'm not intimately familiar with how natural medicines have been used by indigenous peoples, but it strikes me that these practices will not be aligned with the state regulations, such as, being used in a healing center, for instance. And it seems like adding some restrictions around these indigenous practices to fit them into a regulated program has the potential to alter traditional uses. So at the very least, policy should not prevent traditional uses, and something like a carve out seems to make sense in my mind. That's all I have on this topic.
Thank you. Noah, go ahead.
Wanted to make one more comment. I agree with Carissa that certain terms like shaman shouldn't just be thrown around. That if there are certain terms like that that hold a lot of importance, that they be maybe recognized and defined and limited their use unless deemed appropriate. And the the advertising of a federally recognized tribe with any kind of facilitator or licensed entity, I think should be approved by a tribal leader, so that would help prevent future harms. And I also really agree with Gabriella about what does harm mean, and getting some definitions behind that from different resources, so that there's no way of skirting around them. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Gabriella, did you have something to add? I saw your hand pop up.
Yes. Okay, so I have a couple of more things. For us as Indigenous traditions, we also see these medicines as living entities. They're living beings, they're our relatives. And so the cultivation process has been something that's been a concern with the elders that I've spoken to, as for myself as well. And, Carissa mentioned kind of the big, massive commercialization and impacts of these potential cultivation centers. And so, part of the concern there is when we're growing these medicines in such a large scale and with the motivation of profit, and with people that don't really necessarily have that experience of growing this medicine. So yeah, finding support for how Indigenous people, specifically from the Mazatec traditions or traditions in Mesoamerica that have experience with psilocybin, to be supported in this process. There's so much emotional work and labor that's placed on us. We're saying we need to center and lead, and we need to center and support Indigenous elders. So how are you financially, what kind of systems are you creating to support that financially? Because I've also heard some of our elders that say, we don't have, well, first, these spaces are really violent for us to be in and we're not heard. But the other piece is compensation. We have other things to worry about, like on reservations with no water access, that we can't necessarily be in these spaces for barriers of transportation or language or that big compensation piece. So processes and programs to financially support elders and tradition keepers offering this education, and that will also help address the historical pieces where we're talking about our history our way. I also have some more, let me just look at my notes here. Yeah, so one of the concerns too is this working board. There was some uncertainty around, how the recommendations were going to be who was going to kind of approve them. And it also concerns me that the city council and the mayor, who also don't belong to these traditions, are going to be making these really impactful decisions. And want to be careful of when we're talking also about harm, about the intellectual property and the traditions themselves. So just want to encourage that we're not just thinking about the medicines themselves, and we're thinking about the ecosystems of these communities and if the intangible things. Traditions are very much tangible. And so thinking just all the layers of harm that will come to the traditions of these people. And also, we've heard really unfortunate things that there's attempts to patent even kind of what you would call the intellectual property of Indigenous communities. So supporting with the protections of those. And in our last meeting, there was certain folks from the industry that were like, well, what is the government going to do? What is the government? The government needs to do this. And I said, well, what is the industry doing? What are all of these people that are frothing at the mouth from industry, again, heavily represented here? What is the social responsibility that you're going to take, if any? And what have you thought about those considerations? Because we can't just keep placing all of this on the government. Again, this was not consented to by any of the Native traditions whatsoever. So this isn't, again, this is something that while we keep saying Colorado voters voted for this, Indigenous communities did not vote for this. And when we talked to Senator Steve Fenberg, who was developing this before it became a bill, again, he added the Indigenous federally recognized and Indigenous working group, and we had asked for that to be indefinite as a form of oversight and a form of empowering the Indigenous leaders to continue making these decisions and advising. So while one of my recommendations is, or one of my community's recommendations is for more than 4 of these meetings, I would eventually like to see that develop as an oversight committee led and centered by Indigenous people and not by industry. So that's one way that we can prevent future harms and ongoing harms against Native communities.
Thank you so much. Ray?
Yeah, I guess my comment is more of a question back about cultivating practices, especially from an Indigenous perspective, as well as people who have historic bloodlines that have worked in mycology. And I'm wondering if there's going to be a recommendation to include more natural cultivating practices, like Gabby was saying, or Gabriella was saying, such as, for instance, foraging, and allowing more traditional practices of restorative agriculture and restorative forestry through mycology, such as foraging and natural outdoor cultivation, and not just outlining major commercial operations that don't necessarily use sustainable or restorative practices, even though they exist inside of a sustainable and restorative industry. And I'm wondering if there's going to be a recommendation about that, and I'm wondering what exactly it's going to include.
All right, thanks everybody for addressing this first question. I think we'll
Wait,
move in.
it looks like Gabby has her hand up still, so I didn't know if she had something else to add.
No, I'll lower my hand.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to say everything that you wanted to before we move on.
Okay, so this, some of the ideas and feedback that we just heard kind of touch on some more concrete ideas about how we could actualize equitable implementation. And so I wanted to just review some at a high level, just some citywide business equity initiatives that the city of Denver has put into place for various types of businesses, various types of communities in the city, in 4 main categories. So we have licensing exclusivity for cannabis social equity applicants. So in order to qualify for Most of our marijuana business licenses, like stores, hospitality businesses, cultivation facilities, and manufacturing facilities, folks have to qualify as a social equity applicant until July 1st of 2027. So there's a 6-year exclusive period where only those applicants could qualify for new business licenses. Cannabis social equity applicants also have the exclusive ability to conduct home delivery of cannabis on behalf of stores in Denver. For social impact requirements for all cannabis businesses, every cannabis business has to submit a social impact plan with their new application and their renewal application that outlines the activities they're doing to promote community engagement, diversity and inclusion, social equity, sustainability, and contracting with minority-owned businesses. And then on top of that, we have a recognition program called the Cannabis Cares Program, where the city issues badges to businesses that complete a certain number of activities in each impact area. So sort of an incentive program or recognition program to encourage businesses to be aware of and really increase their social impact in those areas. For financial assistance, the city has reduced and waived license and application fees for cannabis social equity applicants. Our fee structure for cannabis licensing is a little complicated, so I won't go into a ton of detail, but I've included a link to our fees website so you can sort of see how those fees break out for social equity businesses versus non-social equity businesses. We also have what's called the Herman Malone Fund, which uses cannabis tax dollars to expand access to venture capital for diverse-owned startup businesses. And part of the benefit of using cannabis tax dollars is they're not federal dollars, and so there's not the same limitation on how those can be used to support businesses that are dealing in a federally controlled substance. The city also offers financial navigation and coaching through financial empowerment centers. For technical assistance, our Cannabis Social Equity Technical Assistance Program offers support to social equity applicants through our first round, sort of a high-level Cannabis 101 education program that helped cannabis entrepreneurs come up with a business plan and approach the licensing process and the permitting process for their facilities. The next round of that program will be more of a project management, helping a handful of social equity applicants actually get their permits for their store or their cultivation or their manufacturing facility, and then ultimately get through the licensing process. Denver's Economic Development Department has business navigators who assist small businesses in navigating various state and local processes and focus on priority neighborhoods. So neighborhoods that are identified by data to be the most vulnerable to gentrification and displacement. We also have a business cooperative development program, which helps small businesses convert to an employee-owned model. So if they want their employees to have an ownership stake in the business, the city will help them figure out how to do that. And then we also have we've done some networking and awareness programs. And I say we, I mean the city. These are not all excise and licenses programs, but some of them are. We had a opportunities conference for cannabis social equity applicants in 2022, where they got to participate in different networking sessions, educational sessions, and just network with other people in the industry and other social equity applicants. The city offers various business trainings and workshops. And then the Denver American Indian Commission publishes a resource guide that has a directory of Native American-owned businesses and a variety of other resources for Native American and Indigenous communities. So that's just an overview of the types of city programs and policies that we have in place for other types of businesses, for other types of communities, to promote equitable implementation of the law. And we'll have this slideshow on our website, so you can click on all of those links, but all of those links have different, go to different web pages that have more information about all of those programs if you're curious to learn more. So with that in mind, the next question we wanted to pose to you all is, what types of local policies and programs would be a good fit for Denver's natural medicine program to promote equitable implementation. So we've talked about licensing priority and exclusivity, fee reductions and waivers, business navigation and education, grants, technical assistance, education, social impact requirements. And obviously we welcome other ideas as well. So I'm going to launch a poll for this group, just to get a sense of what types of programs you all think would be the most impactful. And feel free to choose as many as you like, but really try to choose those ones that you think would be the most impactful in helping create an equitable natural medicine regulatory system in Denver. And while everyone is taking the poll, I'll just say, you know, like Erica said, we're not voting. We're just trying to sort of get a pulse on what you all think are the most useful policies and programs that maybe we should consider recommending to City Council or to the mayor.
It's Abby, it's saying that hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Oh no,
Yeah, I think
that's unfortunate. Sorry about that.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting if there wasn't a technical glitch.
See, this is why the whiteboards are too complicated for us. We're struggling with the poll. Well, let me see if I can figure it out, but we can just launch into a discussion as well, and please feel free to jump in and, you know, tell us what programs you think would be most impactful and why, and or if there are other ideas that you all have that are outside the box that we haven't thought of, we'd love to hear it.
I invite Carissa to share what she shared in the chat. It's a great idea.
Sure. And I would even ask that possibly this could be added to one of the poll options. Oh, by the way, sorry for not coming on camera. I am working in a very remote location in the desert this month, and the internet is unstable. So it helps to stay off video. What I had put in the chat was I was asking if environmental impact could be added to the business initiatives, and that environmental racism is a real thing. I think Gabriela mentioned Suncor as one example, which is a great example of a corporation harming disproportionately impacted communities, but with very little accountability, in that they budget in for the fees and the fines. It is pocket change to them. The government regulations do not really faze them. So what regulations will be in place regarding natural medicine and regarding industrial waste products? Mushroom mycelium spores spread very rapidly. Spores in excess when breathed in can cause many health issues. And it could become invasive on land and property issues. So that's one thing that I think should be added to the poll. But as far as I'm concerned, the environmental impact, licensing priority, fees, reductions and waivers, the grants, and social impact requirements would be my selections on the poll.
Awesome, thank you. I think Abby's trying to figure it out, so I'll kind of steer the ship. Are there any other folks who want to talk about what their favorite options are and why?
Yeah, Erica. I think for me, I'm sorry, I'm kind of sick. So can you guys hear me?
We can.
I'm gonna talk very little today. I think for me, the main one will be the grants to help the equitable access, the fee reductions and waivers, similar to what we have in marijuana, with the same, idea of financial equity. The business navigation and education and public education being just as important, but coming second to allow for the people starting a business to, you know, have that swell of knowledge that they need to implement their visions. And as well as for like the public education, I really liked everything that Gabriella was saying earlier. And, you know, some of the things that were brought up by other panelists were things that I never even considered before. So having access to that information, I think would be very uh, valuable as well.
Thanks, Bia. Looks like Nico's got his hand up next.
Yeah, I was gonna give a +1 to fee reductions and waivers. Equitable implementation often involves increasing access to those who are traditionally underserved. These medicines have the potential to have a large impact on mental health disorders that disproportionately impact underserved populations. So anything we can do to increase access by lowering costs and finding alternative funding sources would get my vote. Public education feeds into that, as Bia mentioned as well. And I think anything we can do to set ourselves up for a potential Medicaid coverage for these types of medicines would be amazing. And I think that would require extensive measurement of program impact, including adverse events, safety, and efficacy. So it's not really on here, but our efforts to measure impact, I think, will be important in finding alternative funding resources to increase access to these programs.
Great, thank you. Valeria.
Hi, everyone. Just to pick it back off of Nico's statement, the public education, and also making sure that it's addressed in different languages. And I think part of the education piece is also maybe breaking down myths or stigma around these plant medicines. And also speaking for the Latino community, there's still a lot of stigma around mental health. So maybe including some of that perspective as well.
Thank you. Next, we've got Noah.
I feel that need-based grants are going to be really important, and the business navigation and education to really help those who have not been in a compliant industry before can be very challenging. So offering those types of services, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. Gabriella.
Yeah, just once again, doubling down on some kind of oversight, continuous oversight on the harm reduction and the impacts on Indigenous communities, medicines, and ecosystems, and, you know, preventing things like Suncor and what Carissa has mentioned. So I think that falls under social impact requirements. And also something, you know, that I've been thinking about is like, there's so much money that folks will have to somehow find, since this is not yet supported by Medicaid, and you know, very real issues around Colorado's mental health crisis, which I think has been expressed through such a need for alternative forms of healing. But in our communities, we hear so much, like not even related to this medicine, is that we really need culturally responsive mental health and more community-led mental health. And so this is an extension of that. You know, we're just trying to fit these Indigenous medicines have been criminalized for so long, and now we're trying to fit this into the system. This is how, unfortunately, the drafters of this bill and the lawyers wrote it, is you know, kind of handing it over for our traditional medicines to be regulated in the system that they don't fit in. So I'm also thinking about integration support. You know, there's so much, I'm not in the mental health field, but if I were to go in, like, is there a consultation fee? Is there, and so this goes with both fee reductions and waivers, but also recognizing that there is such a lack of integration support after these ceremonies, and or after these, whatever folks are calling this in the medical center, but I'll just go with ceremony. And the time that folks will have to take off, especially if it's a person of Native descent or a person of color who's coming to these centers and really needs that time. So integration support and just like all of these fees that are required just to have one of these ceremonies. And also thinking about some of these taxes, if we're looking at the heavy fees on cannabis, for those funds to go to Indigenous communities to fund, not just for the Indigenous people to be able to come and have a treatment at these healing centers, but also cultural programs, cultural revival, funding some of the really important things that are important for cultural preservation.
Thank you. And next, it looks Tristan.
At this point, this is being a little bit duplicative here, but really just ensuring that taking a step back, right? Like the execution of this doesn't need to be extremely expensive unless we write a whole bunch of regulations around it that costs a lot of money and time to make it to where people with only money and time can participate and then kind of set the prices. So being really, really just aware of the downstream effect of implementing a regulation and what that's really going to cause, trying to be really intentional to keep those prices down. And then one thing that was mentioned earlier was about, integrating, allowing something like Medicaid, allowing the use of insurance in general. This might be more of a state thing, but there's two things that are happening, right? There is a session, whether it's like a mental health session, a ceremony, whatever that practice is, that session could occur without the actual compound being brought into it. So is there a way to create regulations to where they are quite separate, and it basically creates almost an a la carte option so that someone can go to therapy and bill their therapy through their insurance if they're lucky enough to have it, and then maybe they have to pay out of pocket for the psilocybin, which at any amount of scale is not expensive, right? So just trying to think through ways to start keeping additional regulatory barriers from being implemented into this. And honestly, the last thing that I will say as well is, I don't know if I would love Denver to really seriously consider if they need to have their own licensing model or if they can just rely on state models. And obviously I say that to any municipality, because that's just an additional expense.
Thank you so much. I think next in the queue is Ray.
Yeah, this was just in response to the aftercare option, and it kind of builds on what Tristan just mentioned, which is in Oregon, I've consulted for a couple of companies there, and there's been such a welcoming by so many facilitation centers to allow people to have ongoing therapy, ongoing ceremony, ongoing neurology tests that are not regulated as part of their session. And that has really helped to taper off the price. The price in Oregon is already incredibly high. And by allowing people to choose what's best for their own mental health, it has a built-in fail-safe for being able to stopgap exuberant pricing. And it's something that Colorado is still talking about and figuring out, but although there's been problems in Oregon, and we all know that, the a la carte option for continuing your own therapy and giving agency to the individual who's experiencing that therapy, however they need to experience it, has really helped to cut down on some of the prices and might be something we entertain as something we advise as a group.
Thank you, Ray. Anybody? Oh, Gabriella, go ahead.
Yes, thanks again. I remember something about public education, because something that is really, taken foot here, unfortunately, in Colorado, is that so many people of non-native descent have centered themselves as, the leaders of this movement, of leaders of this work, and have been making decisions for our communities, and including doing that public education. So I know the city of Denver recently awarded MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, the contract to do the education for first responders. And that's really has been really problematic for us with the history of abuse and allegations and several cases where they've been held liable for harm. And Chacruna Institute, you know, some of these massive non-native led organizations who specifically choose to kind of ignore any kind of dissent, any of our relatives who have expressed that these companies are very harmful. And so their companies, they have a lot of private industry interest in commercializing these medicines. So the education piece to come from and fully supported and funded by both industry and government as part of the tax dollars that are going to come from this. And even prior, like we really need that education to be coming from us and led by us. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to perpetuate a lot of, like Valeria mentioned, you know, a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of stigma around these medicines. But because they're our traditional heritage, then we must be leading the education pieces around this as well.
Thank you. Any other folks who want to chime in? Noah, go ahead.
I just kind of wanted to echo what Tristan was saying, the importance of adding, you know, additional local licenses in order to kind of keep things affordable for everyone. We just want to take that into consideration. We don't want to have too many requirements for state and local licenses to be able to participate.
Thank you. All right, thank you all for the great discussion. I'm going to transition us now to make sure that we have enough time for our next topic. But like I said, we're not done talking about this. It'll continue to come up in future meetings, and we want to continue to hear from you all about these topics. And please feel free to email us as well if you have thoughts that we didn't quite get to during this discussion. You know, we'd love to hear, you know, your written thoughts. If you want to connect with us one-on-one, that's fine as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica for the next part of our discussion.
All right, thanks, Abby. And thanks everyone. It's great to hear all of your thoughts, your ideas. We really appreciate that. Another important theme, as Abby mentioned, that we heard in the first meeting was the emphasis on the participant experience, with safety and accessibility presenting kind of as two areas. And so, like Abby mentioned earlier, the state will be tasked with enacting the licensing standards and rules for facilitators and issuing licenses for healing centers. However, we want to make sure that we're advocating on behalf of our Denver communities and supporting their needs however we can in our local regulations or programs, as well as in our feedback to the state on the regulations. So the next couple of slides will have some questions about safety and accessibility. And so we'll start with participant safety. And I think, right, if you have ever facilitated or if you have ever sat in ceremony with natural medicine and would like to, you know, share best practices or, you know, things that you know make a good experience, we would love to hear your feedback on these questions. So what risks may exist for participants before, during, and after a natural medicine session, how facilitators or natural medicine healing centers can mitigate those risks, and then if there are any local regulations or programs that might help mitigate those risks that we should be aware of. I see Gabriella's hand.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. This is a new laptop. I am going to lower my hand. Thanks.
Oh,
No worries. No problem.
I wasn't sure. Oh, and it looks like, I'm not sure who was first. I think Dale maybe, and then Valeria. Okay, great.
Great. I just wanted to mention quickly that Rocky Mountain Poison and Drug Services is already implementing some surveillance tools in this space to kind of keep track of what is going on as far as efficacy, but also sort of safety issues, mostly regarding ketamine clinics at the moment, but that could really be applied to these healing centers. And so I think it'd be a great idea to be kind of in touch with them as far as surveillance of how this gets rolled out and what are the actual impacts that it has regarding participant safety.
That's exciting. Thank you for sharing that. Valeria?
Sure. And it's Valeria, or V is fine as well. Let's see, the risk for before, one thing that really comes to mind right away is, and this goes back to the education piece, is understanding, there's a lot of folks on medication, on antidepressants or different types of medications that can interfere with psilocybin or other natural medicine. So in the before part, that's the kind of the biggest red flag, that in their current mental state, and also what coping tools or support systems people have in place. Those are some things that I think about before. During, I think it depends if this is an individual session or a group ceremony. There's different risks that come with each as well. And then I think, as Gabriela was saying, we're really focusing heavily on preparing people for a ceremony or preparing people to sit with this medicine. However, I think that this medicine opens up people's ability to feel. And again, we live in a society where we are trained to numb. And so we need to prepare people heavily for what the integration process is going to look like, and incorporating different types of supports. So that can be one-on-one therapy, group integration circles, again, all of this in different languages to be accessible to different groups of people, and maybe time off work. And also through the whole piece is educating people on the vast experiences that they can expect from this medicine. Yes, sometimes it's blissful and peaceful, and other times it's really intense and heavy. And even when people have very blissful experiences, the transition back into society is really intense. And so again, emphasizing that we need to be thinking really intentionally about what integration supports can look like for people as we move forward. I could go on so many of this, but I will end it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Marcy was next.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about the population that are using these treatments for existential distress, palliative care, hospice patients, and the fact that it should be known and they should be educated. Those around the facilitators included should all know that there is a likelihood, a possibility that these can feel such peace that they are letting go and actually dying during this treatment or quickly thereafter. And in order to prevent something from happening that they don't want, I think it's very important to understand that they, if they do not resuscitate, and they do not want you to call 911 if they stop breathing, so that they can transition peacefully and have those things in writing before going forward with their treatments.
Thank you. Next we have Nico.
Hi. I think before the session, having some sort of formal informed consent process where facilitators are required to share what could happen and what often happens in a consistent way. I don't know if that is going to, if the state will adopt a consistent manner of how informed consent needs to happen. So that's opportunity for us to potentially have some insight. Beyond informed consent, the actual screening process for a potential participant, there's the medical screening aspects, which again, there likely will not be a consistent way that medical screening will take place. I know that Anschutz has been working on a medical screening apparatus to create a risk score for participants. Screening will be necessary to determine what type of facilitator a participant will need to see, but there's also kind of a safety plan that could be generated from screening. And so I think to mitigate risks during the session, appropriate medical screening and safety plans could be implemented as well. And then there's just so much we don't know about different interactions with natural medicines in different states of mind, different medications, different medical history and psychiatric history, that collecting reporting on outcomes would be extremely important. So we can start to identify where additional areas for safety can be implemented in future policy. Because we may not know that it interacts with certain things because clinical trials haven't reached that far yet. So utilizing the massive experiment that we're rolling out in our city and state to actually identify areas where there could be increased efficacy or increased risk of adverse events. So I think that's an important aspect in my mind, is figuring out how do we actually use this to identify more opportunities to increase safety and efficacy.
Thanks, Nico. I want to make sure we hear from as many folks as possible. So I'm going to jump to Brandon just because we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, sure. So I was reading through, I just posted a little blurb from DORA's most recent drafts of regulations. And this was really the only mention of like physical safety during the session itself. And I guess I'd like to advocate when we talk to our state partners and colleagues to maybe expand on this verbiage. It was kind of vague, and particularly like, you know, monitoring a participant's vital signs. I mean, this is a very intensely physiologic experience, and providing education to facilitators of knowing, you know, when something is an emergency versus not an emergency, for instance. If they do not seem to be hydrated, do we have solutions for that? And kind of stating that really explicitly, I think will be, I'd advocate for. So.
Thanks, Brandon. Michael, let's go to you next.
Great, thank you so much. So one of the things that I'd like to bring up is, you know, one of the challenges that is happening in Oregon right now is the length of time that the intoxicating effects last, especially with regard to very large dosages. And one of the concerns is around, you know, what do you do if a client has only paid for a certain length of time during a session, is only, you know, paying for a certain number of hours to be monitored, and, you know, that session ends and they're not, you know, essentially fully sober, right? That you know, they shouldn't be operating a motor vehicle is really the significant public safety risk there. And so I don't know at what level this may be controlled with regard to something like general anesthetic. But, you know, a lot of places who are offering, you know, surgeries and whatnot, they require you to essentially you can't leave if you are planning on operating a motor vehicle on your own, right? Like, you're required to either take a cab home, take an Uber home, or be, you know, in the company of somebody that you know who can monitor you. You know, I don't know if this is something that can be required at a local level, but at the very least, you know, providing guidance or, you know, requirements to at least help develop a safety plan or ask about these things, you know, have the individual have a plan for how they're going to actually leave the center, so that, you know, if they are still under the influence, they're not stuck in the center, no way to get home, you know, nowhere for them to go. That could be a significant risk.
Thanks, Michael. Hope, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying. And to Michael's point, you know, perhaps even requiring a person to be there with them. And this person, whether it's a loved one, friend, whatever, will also have to go through the prep sessions. Those are really important because it's during those sessions where, you know, the consent is created. Also, you know, and during that time, you know, you're addressing doing all of the screening, of course. And, you know, sometimes things as far as, you know, undiagnosed mental issues come up during that time as well. Also, one of the things to help mitigate some issues is to make sure that Facilitators and healing centers stay within their scope of practice. Some healing centers are going to have medical personnel on staff. Some of them aren't. Some of them are going to have mental health professionals on staff. Some of them aren't. So the point is to make sure that you're only practicing within that area of expertise that you have. Thank you.
You hope. Carissa?
Yeah, I agree with most of what's been saying here. I think that you know, definitely treating people like clients, that I think we need to work around the language, but I won't try to repeat much of what's been said. I think that around participant safety, there needs to be much education on not just for participants, but for facilitators on the expectations and how nuanced the results and the approach should be. This is not like a one size fits all happy pill, and it will have different effects on different people, and it won't have the same effect on the same person multiple times. So it is extremely nuanced and must be approached with that consideration. For example, the approach used by the center or the facilitator and the result could be vastly different for, say, a combat veteran working through trauma versus someone looking for more of a daily maintenance. In addition, I think there needs to be much more cultural awareness when it comes to this. Much trauma for BIPOC people is rooted in racism. And so I wonder if there is a way that maybe there could be a network among facilitators where, a European American facilitator might recognize, hey, this Black person or this Indigenous person could benefit more from a traditional ceremony than a clinical, westernized medicinal approach to solving issues. And I'm wondering what that community of facilitators could look like and how we could lift up those kinds of expectations around facilitation. I think this education goes way beyond simply being trauma informed. It is one thing to be like, I understand trauma and therefore I can help you, versus I am very well educated in the type of trauma that has caused you this pain and that has caused issues in your life. Also, I think we need to point out that this medicine, people don't seek this medicine only to resolve trauma and pain. There are loads of other reasons, and it doesn't have to be so negative, but regardless of the motivation, I think that education is key to safety and to preventing further harm, because harm can be made, especially when there is a lack of cultural awareness and education.
Thanks so much, Carissa. Next, we had Noah. And Noah, right before you answer, I just want to let everyone know we did have one more question on the agenda, but I don't want to stop this good discussion. So we will move that to a future agenda. So we can, continue hearing your thoughts on this question. So Noah, go ahead.
Sure. I think safety is really important when it comes to natural medicine. There's a lot of risks for the participants. Some of the main ones that come to mind are the drug interactions. And I know that there is a list of drugs that have been put together for facilitators to review. I feel that all drugs that someone is on should be reviewed. There are drugs that are not on that list, such as MAOIs, that could greatly influence the intensity and the metabolites of natural medicine that could be a problem. Other risks include self-harm or harming other people in the building, instigating latent mental health conditions like psychosis or schizophrenia, nausea and vomiting, injuries from a lack of coordination, a delayed onset of the medicine, inaccurate dosing from preparation techniques, and facilitators taking advantage of participants under the influence. Some of the ways that facilitators or the healing centers can mitigate these risks, again, including, considering all the drugs and doing the research for any interactions for every participant individually, providing a safe environment that includes things like access to weapons or glass or windows, in multiple story buildings, or stairs. If somebody is at a healing center and they need to use the bathroom, having to go up and down the stairs can be a risk. And reviewing a participant's mental health and their family history of mental health, not only before, but also after the session, to make sure that it hasn't sparked any mental health conditions later on. It could be days or weeks after a session. Limiting excessive mobility and identifying any trip and fall hazards in the facility, and being able to follow up with the participant that same day after the session, to make sure there isn't a delayed onset, which has been documented. And also, having participants consume the natural medicine as it's packaged and directed for dosing. There are, the cap of the mushroom can be double the potency of a stem. So if someone is preparing a tested dose, but they only are consuming the cap, it could be a lot more. It could be a lot stronger than what is anticipated. Some local regulations that might help mitigate these risks would be allowing manufacturers the ability to refine the products to help prevent some of these things, or providing a PRN of an anti-anxiety or antipsychotic if the situation deems for that, or anti-nausea medication, and also monitoring facilitators and providing participants with a way to report any kind of inappropriate behavior from a facilitator should be created. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Gabriella?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, it's really hard for many in our community to even understand how our traditions and medicines can be used in this heavily, intensely regulated, controlling, and confined piece of legislation, because that's what it is. It's a way to, confine and regulate every single aspect from cultivation to the ceremony experience to integration. And so, just ironically, like what risks may exist for participants, sorry, what risks may exist for participants before, during, and after a natural medicine session? I mean, inherently, we're talking about, we're looking for so much healing from these systems of oppression and commercialization and capitalism. That's the root of what we're trying to heal, or what we think we're going to heal with these medicines. So what are we doing about that? That's a longer conversation. I didn't have the opportunity to dive into these questions. I didn't think that we were going to get here. I'm just really pointing out that I have been to the natural medicine advisory board meetings, and it's heavily regulated and kind of used. Many of the regulations are, they're trying to line them up with the regulations for therapists, and just observing how much of a difference, like all these talks about contact and touching people, and you can't even serve somebody that you know and somebody that you're related to, and the pictures that I've seen are just in this sterile room with somebody with a mask and you can't touch them. And I just I don't have the solutions for these right now, but it's just so contrary to how we serve. And whereas this emphasis is safety and regulations and mitigating these risks, and it's not about community building, it's not about actually healing the systems of oppression, it's not about dismantling them. And this is very much like fear-based and regulatory. And so, to be perfectly honest, I don't think a lot of Indigenous people will want to be in the system. And that's fine. Part of equity is also leaving us alone and letting us kind of, unfortunately, we've been criminalized for this, but equity is leaving us alone and letting us take care of our communities. I would say, we've been hearing to, well, just have the government give us that money or have them support us, and we'll continue doing as we need to. I know there's a representative of the Ute community on the working group, the Indigenous working group. So, of course, I don't speak for all Indigenous people. I know they have Indian health services there. There's a lot of problems there. So continuing to build relationship with them and hearing from this Indigenous working group. But again, it's just, yeah, this is so contrary to how we work, and it's kind of counterproductive to actual healing that needs to take place.
Thank you, Gabriella. Dale?
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to bring up 2 points kind of from the vantage of the healthcare side. At the hospital I work at, Denver Health, we're the safety net hospital for the city. I'll just be frank. We really are inundated with multiple crises of mental health as well as substance use disorders. I literally came to this meeting just after seeing a patient who had non-fatally overdosed on fentanyl. It's just something we're seeing up close and personal. And so, at our institution at Denver Health and the Denver Health system, we're really trying to integrate various kinds of behavioral health, mental health supports into different parts of our system. For example, integrating more mental health therapy, substance use counseling at our primary care clinics, different therapies and supports, for example, at our methadone clinic, and then also a lot more things in the hospital itself, where a lot of these crises are taking place, and some of the more severe cases are showing up. And so what that's bringing to mind is, we're definitely looking for ways to implement kind of novel therapies and things that might be effective in addressing these crises. What I wonder about is, in implementation, if there were to be a city license for this, how is that going to work with healthcare? These kind of environments where patients are already being monitored really heavily, as far as at least acutely, and have some infrastructure already in place. Is this going to be the same license for a place like that as it will be for an entrepreneur in the city trying to start something, versus some other context? And so, just a question I'm bringing up: would that be the same? License would be there'd be specific things depending on what level of monitoring you have. Some of these questions are being talked about at the state level, so I understand this is more limited venue. The second thing I just want to mention, as far as patient safety, people are talking about potential unanticipated outcomes happening from these really intense, unpredictable sometimes experiences. And I know there was discussion of first responder training happening. A lot of these patients are going to, if they are not selected carefully and they have experiences that are pretty harmful for at least acutely, they may show up at our emergency department. They may show up at other emergency departments in the city. And so part of the previous topic we were talking about, kind of public education. I think one city effort that could be focused on is educating healthcare about what to expect, especially in emergency departments. Will we be, what should we be looking for as far as patients coming? Will we see a spike in, this kind of symptom that may actually be, we need to ask about, have you had that kind of experience recently? And just kind of have some better general knowledge about that.
Thanks, Dale. We haven't heard from Tom, so we'll go to Tom next and then to Ray.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to give some information for people who are unaware of how some of the things break down on the Native American level. City and county, those are the spheres of influence what we're talking about here. Most Native tribes, Ute, Mountain Ute, and Southern Ute, they're sovereign nations. Reservations are labeled as, own sovereign nations within the United States. So, what we're doing here will not necessarily impact any kind of traditional lands. With that said, Native people do take notice of what's going on around in the surrounding counties and the state that they reside in. And, just having that kind of information, knowing, that, hey, even though some of these things won't impact us, we recognize, some of our people are here in Denver and in Colorado, Pueblo, any other place that these healing centers may be. So with that in mind, I'm hearing all the, messages around, traditional people and respecting our ways. So I do feel, that message has been, said, and we need to find a way of, honoring, the Native people who are here, the people, the practitioners. And I think we're doing that by, having these hard discussions of, how is this going to be implemented? What is this going to look like? The harm reduction and all these things. So I just wanted to, be grateful to sit in on these conversations, but I just wanted everybody to know kind of how Native Americans who are federally recognized live. And in Denver, there are over 200,000 Native American tribes, and those are like 500 plus different tribes. The majority are Sioux and Navajo, with Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Pueblo taking up third and fourth places in Denver. So there's a big kind of community here that is not heard, and so again, I just wanted to say thank you for listening to, my concerns, some concerns of the counterparts here who identify as Native. And so again, glad that, we're having these hard discussions, and that, I just wanted to say that there are different spheres of influence, and being Native American from a sovereign nation, we try to pattern our things around, the surrounding areas, federal government, work with state entities to, collaborate on tax and regulation. So this is kind of where the intersection is. But again, people don't know that when they speak to Native Americans. Sometimes people think, we're still wards of the United States, which we're not. So I just wanted to put that information out there so everybody's aware. Again, it's this kind of information is not taught in schools. And again, our historical trauma, epigenetics, has been passed down through generations. So we are distrustful of anything with, related to the government, state, city, or county. So I just wanted to say, I'm grateful to even, be hearing these things in these spheres, because for years we haven't been able to even have a voice. And, I just wanted to put that input out there.
Thanks, Tom. We'll try to wrap up here shortly so we can go to public comment, but I do want to make sure we get to Ray before we do that. So Ray, you're up.
Thank you. This is just in response to something that Noah said, and I just wanted to bring the most up-to-date data. when we look at mushrooms, the fruit, the molecule that is psilocybin is ubiquitous throughout the entire organism. In the chitin, which is the hard material of the fruit, we find that psilocybin is equal through the stem and the cap all the way through the flume. So even though there's some mushrooms, less than 10% of the species that we know of that are in the psilocybe species are different in areas on the fruit itself that has psilocybin quantity. In general, 90% of the psilocybe mushrooms that we know of are ubiquitous throughout the entire fruit. So what you're ingesting in the cap is going to be the same amount of psilocybin content that what you're ingesting in the stem. And a lot of times that difference is because of the amount of exposure and that psilocybin in that fruit has had. So over time it will dissipate. And I just wanted to, it's data that isn't readily out there and it's only about 2 years old. So I wanted to bring that to the group so you have the most up-to-date information.
Thanks, Ray. I think with that, we'll go to our public comment session.
Can I add just one thing really quick? I just want to make sure, again, I've mentioned this before, the importance of deferring to the Indigenous and Tribal Nations Working Group, although it's 9 people, who are Indigenous and federally recognized, that we recognize that the protection of these medicines and traditions is the most important thing. So, emphasizing that we can't be making these decisions as non-Native people or not from these traditions, and not get ahead and think that we can control this process or that we should if we're not coming from these communities. So whereas this is how are we going to implement this, the focus should always be on protecting the sovereignty and the rights of Indigenous people to their sacred medicines.
All right, thank you everybody for a great discussion. We'll save our participant accessibility discussion for next time. So be thinking about that. And I think we'll move to public comments. So if there are any attendees today in the audience who would like to make a public comment, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll give you the ability to unmute yourself. We do ask that you limit your speaking time to 2 minutes. I know that's not a lot of time, but we want to make sure to get to as many folks as possible. And we heard feedback last time that it would be helpful to have a timer on the screen. So we've added a timer. We don't want to rush you, but we heard that it might be helpful to know how much time is left. So feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. Looks like Rachel Ardenoy is first. So Rachel, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself and please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. I just wanted to share that, the city has, there are many areas of industry that the city is used to regulating more stringently than the state, like with marijuana licensing, liquor licensing, things of that nature, which take up a lot of time for excise and licensing. And so I just wanted to share that, just remind the city and the stakeholders that, this is the exact opposite, where the state law says that the cities should not be requiring more stringent regulations for these types of businesses. And so while the city is apparently determining whether or not they're going to be requiring licensure for these types of business, I just wanted to share that I don't think that that would be necessary. That does cause a lot of problems for the cannabis industry. Granted, the state law requires that in cannabis, but it has created a huge quagmire for local governments across the state. And so in this case, we have an opportunity not to make such another quagmire and more work for city resources, as well as lower barriers of entry to folks who are trying to do this important work in the city. And so I just think that the city should also take a look at other very highly regulated businesses that take place within the city, like doctors' offices, lawyers, CPA firms. Those are very highly regulated at the state level. We have state licensure requirements, but there's no requirement at the city level to operate those types of businesses. And so my recommendation is just that the city really follow the call of the question, which is, how much should the city be involved, and try to involve itself as least as possible, so that way there aren't such high barriers of entry for this important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I apologize. My timer stopped at 45 seconds for some reason, but I appreciate you keeping it brief. Next we have Dr. Angela Beers. I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity. I didn't catch the first hour, but I don't know if there's been any discussion around training and education, because it is kind of a Wild West out there right now with people who are certifying and charging for certifications and things of that sort, including institutions that have known legacies of harm with sexual abuse, as well as rampant racism and cultural misappropriation within their own programs. And so I know that in Bill SB 23-290, one of the things that was written in was the consideration for cultural misappropriation. And, that goes all the way back to education and who's educating and what they're doing at that, level. And I missed the first hour of this. So I don't know if there was a conversation around that, but I really feel like that is something that needs to be addressed right away, because a lot of these questions that are coming up around traditional use, this right here is a big issue. So thank you very much. And that's all I've got for now.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, we have Christopher Maestas.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I would just kind of want to second on with the folks who said we, as the city, should look at as a less is more kind of an approach. Everybody's brought up very important points about the things that we need to be considerate of and the population that we're going to be working with. And I think the best thing for the city of Denver to do would be to adopt a position to maximize access to these services and medications, as opposed to try and limit them, which is inherently what licensing at a city level is going to do. Certainly the city needs to know where these businesses are for safety and health reasons, as well as demographic information and other things. But I like the point the previous person brought up. The city doesn't regulate lawyers. The city doesn't regulate hair salons. The city doesn't regulate dentists. And you could argue that those people are pretty impactful in terms of what they do to somebody's life. So I would urge the city to consider a less is more kind of an approach, and let the state kind of be the overarching. Because the other thing's going to happen is if Denver adopts something that is unpalatable to a certain group, they're just going to drive across the road to Arapahoe and set up shop there. So I think the enforcement and pushing certain goals and initiatives is excellent, but I think that there's a good way to do it, and strict licensing at a city level may not be the way to do it.
Thank you so much. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands raised for public comment, so I will turn it back to Ian. Did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I didn't know if it would count as a public comment.
That's okay.
Thank you, Abby. I just for those who are talking about it, I just wanted to put in the chat, if I'm able to. I think that it will go to everybody, specifically from the bill. And what the bill specifically says is a local jurisdiction may enact ordinances or regulations governing the time, place, and manner of the operation of licenses issued pursuant to this article within its boundaries. Sorry, Article 50 is the article that it's referring to. Yeah. Just wanted to share that. I have no commentary, just want to share what's in the bill.
Thanks, Ian. All right, one last call for public comments. Seeing none, I'll hand it back to Molly to wrap us up.
Yeah, just another thank you to everybody. Really great conversation today. I think again we took a lot. I have a lot of notes and lots of things to think about from all the comments and input you all provided us today. So thank you. And I think we know we'll have some of the second piece, the what was it, location stuff on the next agenda. So we'll go there next. And then we also have some other stuff on the roadmap. So, and I think we can also dig into a little bit. I think, as we said in the last session, we are not predetermining whether we want to license yet. All of this information that you're providing us is informative on whether we should or should not be creating a license. And if everything that we discuss and all the concerns that are brought up are addressed at the state level, then Denver would not head in that direction. So I think it's really helpful for us to have this conversation. And we just didn't want to make that come to that conclusion without having this conversation. So again, it's really informative, really helpful to us. And I know it takes time out of all of your days to help us with this. So we really appreciate it. Like Erica said, we couldn't make this, do this without you. So thanks again for everybody's participation. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you, what's the date, Abby? May 23rd, I think.
Yes, May 23rd. So we'll send out an agenda about a week in advance and still be in communication with you all. So feel free to reach out anytime, and members of the public and members of this group, if you'd like to email written comments about anything discussed here today or anything else, you can send those to exlpolicy@denvergov.org. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.